Jax's revenge domain. Your resume seems inflated, the interviewer said with a dismissive wave. I seriously doubt you've actually handled infrastructure projects of this scale. My stomach dropped as 25 years of solid engineering work got brushed off like yesterday's newspaper. The weight of my shrinking savings account pressed down as I sat up straighter in that uncomfortable chair. Every project listed is genuine, I said quietly. The legacy system integration I designed for the Northeast manufacturing grid. Anyone can write impressive numbers on paper. Jennifer Hayes cut me off with that thin smile young executives perfect in business school. Without backing from a recognized firm, these claims are questionable at best. 11 months ago, I was directing technology implementations across 3 states until new ownership decided the old guard needed refreshing. Now I was on interview number 89, hitting the same wall of doubt from people half my age who thought experience meant obsolescence. Jennifer tapped my resume with her Mont Blanc pen. This client portfolio seems particularly far-fetched for someone with your background. Then the side door opened. A guy in an expensive suit walked in, stopped dead, and stared at me. Holy cow, it's you, Casey Fisher exclaimed with genuine warmth. The miracle worker who saved our entire infrastructure last year when every consultant said our systems were beyond repair. He turned to Jennifer. Your integration strategy prevented what could have been a $30 million disaster. Jennifer's mouth opened slightly. That's exactly why I'm here today, Casey continued. We want to expand our contract with TechFlow Systems. Is he joining your team? Because that would close the deal immediately. Let me back up. My name's Gordon Walsh. I'm 49 years old, and I've spent my career making complex systems work when everyone else said they couldn't be fixed. Growing up in Ohio, I was the kid who fixed neighbors' radios and televisions before anyone taught me how. Put myself through engineering school working nights at a manufacturing plant, learning that real-world problems don't follow textbook solutions. Over 25 years, I'd developed a reputation for seeing patterns others missed and translating that insight into systems that actually worked. But sitting in that TechFlow Systems conference room, none of that mattered to Jennifer Hayes, whose perfectly styled hair and sharp suit screamed MBA fast track. She was maybe 35, probably graduated from some prestigious program where they teach you that anything older than 5 years is legacy junk. After Casey left the room, her whole attitude flipped like a switch. Her rigid posture softened. The critical edge in her voice disappeared like someone had adjusted her volume control. Well, this is certainly unexpected, she said, adjusting her designer glasses. Casey's notoriously hard to impress. Tell me more about your work with his company. I took a measured breath. I designed their legacy system, modernization strategy last year. Their previous consultants recommended complete replacement, citing compatibility issues. But I identified integration pathways they'd overlooked. Jennifer nodded enthusiastically, like she hadn't spent the previous 20 minutes questioning my capabilities. Fascinating. And the results? 28% efficiency improvement in their first quarter, outperforming projections by double digits. Plus, we saved them about $12 million in replacement costs they didn't need to spend. Impressive, she said, scribbling notes like her life depended on it. We should fast-track your application. Given your experience, we might consider you for our senior technology director position. The compensation would be quite generous. The whiplash from contempt to courtship made my head spin. Moments ago, she'd practically called me a liar. Now she was ready to hand me the keys to the kingdom. The position requires someone who commands respect, she continued, missing the irony, completely. Someone with gravitas and industry credibility. I watched her rewrite reality in real time. The dismissive interviewer vanished, replaced by an enthusiastic advocate who'd immediately recognized my potential. It was like watching someone edit a movie while it was still playing. As she outlined next steps with newfound enthusiasm, my mind drifted to 11 months earlier. I'd been senior engineering director at Apex Solutions when a venture capital firm bought us out. The new CEO, Brett Collins, called me to his office on a Tuesday morning. "Gordon, your track record is solid," he'd said while checking his phone every 30 seconds. "But we're implementing a more aggressive innovation model requiring different leadership energy." Translation. The boys' club was closing ranks around guys who knew the latest buzzwords but couldn't troubleshoot a coffee maker if their lives depended on it. Within 8 weeks, all 4 senior engineers over 45 were replaced by recent MBAs from Brett's network. Most had impressive degrees from fancy schools but couldn't tell legacy code from legacy problems. They talked a good game about digital transformation and agile methodologies, but when systems actually broke down, they called consultants. My severance package was generous, designed to prevent lawsuits rather than honor contributions. They made it sound like they were doing me a favor, like early retirement was some kind of gift. At first, I'd been confident. With my experience and track record, finding a new position seemed inevitable. Companies need people who actually understand how things work, right? But 89 interviews later, I'd encountered countless versions of Jennifer. People who couldn't reconcile my achievements with their assumptions about who should achieve them. The pattern was always the same. Young hiring managers who'd learned about technology from PowerPoint presentations, questioning whether I could adapt to modern practices, as if 25 years of solving real problems somehow disqualified me from solving new ones. "We could have an offer prepared by tomorrow," Jennifer was saying, her voice bright with newfound enthusiasm. "I'll just need to check with the executive team, but after Casey's endorsement, it's practically a formality." I looked at her, noting how her earlier contempt had vanished completely. "That's quite a shift in perspective." She laughed lightly, like we'd been best friends all along. "Well, Casey's our highest billing client. His opinion carries significant weight in our decision-making process. And my extensive experience didn't carry any weight until someone else validated it." Her smile faltered slightly. "I hope you understand we have to be thorough in our vetting process. Many candidates exaggerate their achievements these days." "You weren't being thorough," I interrupted quietly. "You decided I was unqualified the moment I walked in here." "That's not true," she protested, color rising in her cheeks. "I was simply asking challenging questions to assess your capabilities. You called my achievements far-fetched and questionable. Those weren't questions, they were accusations based on nothing more than your assumptions." Jennifer straightened papers that didn't need straightening, her hands betraying her discomfort. "Perhaps there was some miscommunication in my approach, but what matters now is that we're very interested in bringing you aboard our team." I gathered my portfolio slowly, taking my time. "I appreciate that. When should I expect to hear about next steps?" Her relief was obvious. "I'll call you personally by tomorrow afternoon with all the details." As promised, Jennifer called the next day with an offer significantly above the advertised range. The number was impressive enough to solve my immediate financial problems, and then some. I requested the weekend to consider it, which she granted enthusiastically, probably afraid I'd slip through their fingers again. That weekend changed everything. Saturday morning, I sat at my kitchen counter staring at the offer letter. The compensation would definitely solve my immediate financial problems. But something felt fundamentally wrong about the whole situation. I thought about all the qualified engineers, particularly guys over 45, who'd been dismissed without a Casey Fisher to champion them. How many talented people had Jennifer and others like her written off because they didn't fit some predetermined mold? My phone chimed with a message from Carl Brooks, my former colleague from Apex Solutions. We'd been meeting monthly for coffee since the acquisition, partly to commiserate and partly to keep each other's spirits up during the job search. "Still on for tomorrow? Got some interesting news to share," his text read. The next morning at our usual diner, Howard radiated excitement. At 61, he had an energy that defied his age and wisdom, reflecting his 30 years in systems engineering. He'd been one of the best troubleshooters I'd ever worked with, the kind of guy who could walk into a broken system and spot the problem everyone else had missed. "I've been consulting with 4 former Apex clients," he revealed after we'd ordered our usual coffee and eggs. "They all asked the same thing. Why isn't there a firm that combines modern technology with institutional knowledge? The big firms have all the latest tools and buzzwords, but they miss the practical realities." I nodded, remembering how often our recommendations at Apex had been challenged by executives who couldn't see beyond PowerPoint presentations and consultant reports that looked impressive but ignored how things actually worked in the real world. "So I've been thinking," Howard continued, leaning forward with that gleam in his eye I remembered from our best brainstorming sessions. "What if we created that firm ourselves? You, me, maybe bring in Amanda for her operations expertise." Amanda Gray had been our operations lead at Apex, another casualty of the acquisition. She was 45, sharp as a tack, and had an uncanny ability to see how technical solutions would actually play out in day-to-day operations. "You mean start our own company?" I asked, though part of me was already intrigued by the possibility. Exactly. Between the three of us, we have contacts across the entire manufacturing belt. My severance is still mostly intact, and I'm guessing yours is too. I pulled out the TechFlow offer letter and slid it across the table. Howard scanned it and let out a low whistle. That's an impressive figure, but your face tells me you're not exactly thrilled about it. The interviewer spent 20 minutes telling me my experience wasn't credible until their biggest client walked in and recognized me. Now suddenly, I'm their top candidate. Howard handed back the letter, shaking his head. Classic. If you take this job, you're walking into another company where your value depends entirely on who validates you, not what you've actually accomplished. He was right, and we both knew it. So what's my alternative? Maybe I just suggested it. Look, we've got the experience, we've got the contacts, and we know exactly what's wrong with how the big firms approach these problems. Over the next 3 hours, we sketched what would become Precision Tech Solutions. Our vision was straightforward, a consultancy specializing in systems the big firms considered challenging. Legacy infrastructure they typically approached with replacement models that ignored practical and financial constraints. We'd seen it time and again. Some hotshot consulting firm would come in, recommend tearing out perfectly functional systems because they weren't state-of-the-art, and charge millions for solutions that were more complex and less reliable than what they replaced. The dirty secret, Howard said, is that most of these legacy systems work better than anything you can install today, if you just know how to integrate them properly. By Monday morning, I drafted a respectful decline to TechFlow and scheduled calls with Amanda and 2 other former colleagues who'd been pushed aside during the Apex acquisition. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Everyone was tired of being told their experience was obsolete. Jennifer's response to my email came within minutes. This is disappointing news. Perhaps we can increase the compensation package. Casey specifically asked about you this morning when he called. I replied that my decision wasn't about money, thanked her for her time, and closed my laptop with a sense of finality that felt surprisingly liberating. The first 6 months of building Precision were the most challenging and rewarding of my career. Howard, Amanda, and I pooled our severance packages as startup capital. We worked from Howard's converted garage, using our industry connections to secure initial meetings. The early days were lean. We had plenty of experience, but no brand recognition, no fancy offices, and no marketing budget. What we had was a combined 70 years of actually making systems work. And it turned out that was exactly what some companies needed. Our first breakthrough came unexpectedly. Lance Gibson, a plant manager at a consumer electronics company, had attended one of my workshops years earlier. He reached out after hearing through the grapevine that I'd started a new venture. My team's been pushing for system modernization for 2 years, he explained during our first call. But every consultant we've talked to says complete replacement is the only option. The quotes are astronomical, and frankly, I'm not convinced the new systems will work any better than what we have. Lance's situation was perfect for what we were trying to do. His plant had a mix of legacy equipment that worked reliably but didn't communicate well with newer systems. The big consulting firms saw dollar signs in a complete overhaul. We saw an integration challenge that could be solved for a fraction of the cost. I remembered how you approached similar challenges at that workshop, Lance continued. You actually seemed to understand that sometimes the old way of doing things has advantages. Would you consider providing an alternative assessment? The project budget was modest compared to what the big firms were quoting, but the opportunity was exactly what we needed to prove our concept. We spent 3 weeks developing a comprehensive analysis that identified integration points the other consultants had completely overlooked. Instead of ripping out functional equipment, we mapped out how to bridge the communication gaps between old and new systems using targeted middleware solutions. When we presented our findings to Lance's team, you could feel the energy in the room shift from skepticism to genuine excitement. 2 vice presidents who hadn't even been scheduled to attend the meeting showed up midway through our presentation. This is exactly what we've been trying to articulate to the board, one of them said afterward. You've quantified the solution while addressing all the practical complexities we were worried about. Our approach saved them 18 months of downtime and about $8 million compared to the complete replacement option. More importantly, the integrated system actually performed better than either the old or new systems would have on their own. That single project led to 3 referrals, each one slightly larger and more complex than the last. Word was spreading that there was a small firm that could make legacy systems play nice with modern technology without breaking the bank or shutting down operations. By month 4, we'd hired 2 junior analysts and moved into a small office space. Nothing fancy, but it felt good to have business cards with a real address instead of Howard's garage. Then came the industry conference that changed everything for us. The annual Manufacturing Technology Summit was the premier gathering for our industry. Normally, a startup like Precision wouldn't have warranted much attention, but Amanda had previously chaired the operations panel and leveraged that connection to secure us a presentation slot. Our topic, legacy integration, maximizing existing infrastructure value, wasn't designed to be provocative. We simply presented case studies showing how replacement-focused approaches systematically overvalued disruption costs while undervaluing operational stability. What we didn't know was that Casey Fisher would be sitting in our audience, taking notes. During the Q&A session, Casey stood up from the third row. "Your methodology challenges everything the major consulting firms have been telling my board for the past 2 years. How confident are you in these efficiency projections?" I recognized him immediately, but kept my voice professional. "Our models have consistently outperformed traditional replacement approaches by 15 to 28% in efficiency metrics across multiple industries. We have comprehensive data supporting every assertion we've made today." "You certainly do," he said with that same warm smile I remembered from the TechFlow interview. "Your strategy transformed our operations last year and probably saved my job in the process. I'm curious why you're not with TechFlow now. I specifically recommended you to them." The room went dead quiet. TechFlow was one of the conference's major sponsors, with their CTO scheduled to deliver the next day's keynote address. This was not the kind of public endorsement they wanted their competition to receive. "I decided to pursue a different opportunity," I replied diplomatically, though I caught several people in the audience exchanging knowing looks. Casey nodded thoughtfully. "Well, their loss is apparently quite significant. My team would be very interested in hearing more about your current work. Are you taking on new clients?" "Selectively," I answered, trying to keep the satisfaction out of my voice. The buzz began immediately after our session ended. Attendees who'd initially skipped our presentation started approaching us in the hallway, requesting business cards and asking about availability. Industry reporters who'd been focused exclusively on the major firms suddenly wanted Precision's perspective on market trends. But the most significant moment came that evening at the networking reception. I was deep in conversation with a potential client when I noticed Jennifer Hayes watching me from across the room. Beside her stood TechFlow's CTO, Scott Coleman, his expression growing more tense by the minute as Casey Fisher made his way purposefully through the crowd toward our conversation. "Gordon," Casey called out, loud enough that nearby conversations paused and heads turned in our direction. "I've been talking with our board of directors this afternoon. We want to transition our entire infrastructure strategy portfolio to precision tech solutions." I could practically feel Jennifer's stare, boring into the back of my head as the implications of Casey's announcement sank in around the room. "That's a substantial portfolio," I said, acutely aware of the attention we were suddenly attracting from every direction. "Worth every penny based on your previous results," Casey replied enthusiastically. "Besides, we've grown increasingly dissatisfied with our current consultant's limited vision and cookie-cutter approach." The not-so-subtle dig at TechFlow wasn't lost on anyone within earshot. I felt Jennifer's stare intensify as she whispered urgently to Scott, probably trying to figure out how to contain this public relations disaster. "We'd be honored to discuss that opportunity with you," I said professionally, though inside I was practically glowing with vindication. "Excellent. Fair warning, though, I've already mentioned your firm to several colleagues from other companies. You should probably expect some calls." As Casey walked away to rejoin his colleagues, Scott and Jennifer immediately intercepted him. Even from across the room, their conversation looked heated, with Casey shaking his head repeatedly at whatever they were proposing. Later that evening, Scott approached me at the bar where I was celebrating quietly with Howard and Amanda. "Gordon, isn't it?" he said with the kind of forced smile that screams damage control. "Scott Coleman, CTO of TechFlow. I understand there may have been some confusion during your interview process with our organization." "No confusion at all," I replied evenly, taking a sip of my beer. "Your technology director made her assessment quite clear until Casey provided some external validation." Scott winced slightly at the directness of my response. "Sometimes our evaluation processes don't properly identify exceptional talent on the first pass. I'd like to personally apologize for any miscommunication and explore whether there might still be an opportunity for collaboration between your expertise and our organization. Before I could formulate a response, Howard appeared at my side with impeccable timing. "Sorry to interrupt, gentlemen, but our next appointment just arrived," he said smoothly. No such appointment existed, but his intervention was perfect. "Of course," I said, turning back to Scott with a polite smile. "It was interesting meeting you, Scott. The conference marked a turning point for Precision that exceeded even our most optimistic projections. Within 3 months, we'd secured contracts with 7 major clients, including Casey's company with their expanded portfolio. Our team grew to 19 people, each one hired not just for technical skills, but for practical experience and diverse perspectives that the big firms typically overlooked. We moved into a larger workspace in a converted warehouse district. Nothing extravagant, but bright and functional with room to expand. I insisted our main conference room have glass walls facing the work area. Transparency would be literal at Precision, not just a buzzword on a mission statement. 6 months after the conference, our client roster had more than tripled. We'd proven that there was substantial demand for our approach, combining cutting-edge technology with institutional knowledge instead of throwing out everything that wasn't brand new. Then we received an unexpected email that would bring everything full circle. Kevin Murphy, TechFlow's Director of Client Services, requested a meeting to discuss potential synergies and collaboration opportunities. The language was corporate speak, but the intent was clear enough. Kevin arrived at our offices precisely on time, impeccably dressed, and visibly uncomfortable. After brief pleasantries and a tour of our facilities, he got straight to the point in our conference room. TechFlow would like to discuss the possibility of acquiring Precision Tech Solutions, he said, his rehearsed pitch slightly undermined by nervous energy. Our board believes there could be significant strategic value in combining our organization's complementary strengths. I kept my expression neutral despite feeling a surge of satisfaction. "That's an interesting proposition, Kevin. May I ask what specifically prompted this interest?" "Your growth trajectory has been remarkable," he replied carefully, consulting his notes. "Your methodologies, particularly your legacy integration framework, have generated considerable attention throughout the industry. The same methodologies that Jennifer Hayes had dismissed as questionable just 18 months earlier. There seems to be some parallel development happening," Kevin continued diplomatically, "but our leadership recognizes that your team has developed a unique approach that would be extremely valuable to our organization's future growth." I nodded slowly. "Please tell Scott I'm certainly open to having that conversation. However, I'd like the initial meeting to include whoever would be responsible for overseeing any potential integration process." "That would be Jennifer Hayes," Kevin said without hesitation. "She's now our Executive Vice President of Strategy and Integration, reporting directly to Scott." I smiled. "Perfect. Please set up that meeting at your earliest convenience." After Kevin left, Howard and Amanda peppered me with questions about my intentions. "Are you actually considering selling to them?" Amanda asked incredulously. "I'm considering hearing what they have to say," I replied, "but I suspect this conversation is going to be very different from my interview there." The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at TechFlow's headquarters downtown. I arrived with Howard and our recently hired legal counsel, walking into the same conference room where Jennifer had questioned my credibility. Scott greeted us warmly while Jennifer stood slightly behind him, her professional smile not quite reaching her eyes. The power dynamic had shifted dramatically since our last encounter. "Gordon, wonderful to see you again," Scott said with genuine enthusiasm. "Thank you for considering our proposal. Thank you for your interest in Precision," I replied, settling into my chair. "I believe you know Carl Brooks, my co-founder and chief technology officer, and this is our general counsel." After introductions, I cut straight to the heart of the matter. "Before we discuss numbers, I'd like to understand TechFlow's vision for Precision post-acquisition. Specifically, how you see our methodologies and team integrating with your existing operational structure." Scott nodded to Jennifer, who straightened her posture before delivering what was clearly a prepared response. "We envision Precision becoming our center of excellence for complex integration projects," she said smoothly. "Your methodologies would be scaled across our global operations while your core team would lead knowledge transfer initiatives to our existing departments." "And our legacy integration framework?" I asked. "The approach that identifies value in existing systems?" "A fascinating initiative," Jennifer replied carefully. though we'd need to align it with our established modernization parameters to ensure consistency with our quality standards. I noted how she still couldn't bring herself to acknowledge that the framework's entire purpose was to challenge those very modernization parameters. Could you elaborate on what you mean by quality consistency? Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. TechFlow has built its reputation on delivering cutting-edge innovation. While we certainly appreciate practical perspectives, we must maintain the technological leadership expectations that our clients have come to rely on. And who would oversee this alignment process? My division would handle all integration activities, Jennifer replied. We'd work closely with your team during the transition period, though ultimately all methodology decisions would need to follow TechFlow's established protocols and standards. Scott jumped in enthusiastically. We're prepared to make a very generous offer, Gordon. Your entire team would receive significant retention bonuses, and you personally would have a senior leadership position within our technology division. Reporting to whom? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Jennifer would be your direct supervisor, Scott confirmed. As Executive Vice President of Strategy and Integration, she oversees all of our specialized divisions and acquisition integrations. I nodded thoughtfully, savoring the irony. Thank you for clarifying the reporting structure. Before we discuss specific numbers, I'd like to share some performance data with both of you. I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward them, displaying comprehensive visualizations of client results from companies that had implemented our recommendations over the past 18 months, compared side by side with industry averages. Both Scott and Jennifer leaned forward, their expressions revealing genuine surprise at the magnitude of the performance differences. These weren't marginal improvements. They represented fundamental shifts in how these companies approached infrastructure development and maintenance. These results aren't just incrementally better, I explained. They represent a completely different philosophy about the relationship between innovation and institutional knowledge. Extremely impressive, Scott murmured, clearly recalculating his assumptions about our market value. Now I'd like to show you something else that I think you'll find equally interesting. I switched to a different visualization showing the experience and background diversity of the teams that had achieved these exceptional results, compared to typical industry hiring patterns. The contrast was stark and undeniable. Precision's methodology had consistently assembled teams that looked nothing like the homogeneous groups typically found in major consulting firms, yet significantly outperformed them across every meaningful metric. Our success isn't despite our different approach to identifying talent, I explained, meeting Jennifer's eyes directly. It's specifically because of it. We don't succeed by forcing everyone into the same predetermined mold. We succeed by finding people whose unique perspectives and hard-earned experience reveal solutions that others systematically miss. Jennifer's expression had grown noticeably tighter throughout my presentation. While diversity initiatives are certainly admirable, she said carefully, TechFlow has developed very specific standards over many years that ensure our clients receive the caliber of professional expertise they expect from us. Are those the same standards that led you to dismiss my experience as far-fetched and questionable during our interview? I asked quietly. The room went completely silent. Scott glanced at Jennifer with raised eyebrows, clearly unaware of the full history between us. I think there may have been some misunderstanding about that particular interaction, Jennifer said, her voice carefully controlled. There's no misunderstanding, I replied calmly. You made a clear assessment that my achievements weren't credible until a major client happened to walk in and validate them. Now you want to apply those same fundamentally flawed judgment criteria to evaluate and potentially control my entire team. The transformation was complete. I'd gone from dismissed job candidate to the person whose approval TechFlow needed for their strategic future. Jennifer Hayes, who'd questioned my qualifications, now sat across from me, hoping to acquire the company I'd built precisely because her initial assessment had been so wrong. My revenge wasn't about humiliating Jennifer or destroying TechFlow. It was about systematically proving that their approach to evaluating talent was fundamentally broken, and positioning myself to fix it from the inside. The best revenge, it turned out, was building something so successful that the people who dismissed you had no choice but to ask you to teach them how you did it. The transformation was complete. I'd gone from dismissed job candidate to the person whose approval TechFlow needed for their strategic future. Jennifer Hayes, who'd questioned my qualifications, now sat across from me hoping to acquire the company I'd built precisely because her initial assessment had been so wrong. Actually, I said, opening a new folder, I have a counter-proposal. I slid documents across the table outlining our terms. Scott's eyebrows rose as he read. This requires creation of a technology leadership council with authority to override standard processes, he said. And Precision would operate with complete autonomy over hiring and methodology, Jennifer added, her voice tight. Correct. You would oversee this transformation as my direct report. The power dynamic had completely inverted. Scott looked troubled. This goes far beyond a standard acquisition. You approached us because our different perspective creates value, I replied. If you want that value, you need to embrace what makes it possible. 3 days later, Scott returned alone. The board reviewed your performance data. The results are undeniable. We're prepared to accept your terms. Over 2 weeks, we finalized the agreement preserving Precision's autonomy while transforming TechFlow's approach to experience-based decision-making. 1 month later, we announced the acquisition. On my first day at TechFlow headquarters, I presented our methodology to 400 employees. The Technology Leadership Council isn't about lowering standards, I explained. It's about recognizing we've been measuring the wrong things. The following weeks brought resistance, but everything changed when our first integrated team outperformed traditional approaches across every metric. At the quarterly board meeting, the data was unambiguous. Identifying overlooked talent created competitive advantage. 3 months later, TechFlow's client satisfaction reached company highs. The most satisfying moment came 1 year after the acquisition. Jennifer appeared in my office doorway. The Midwest project team you assembled identified solutions no one else saw, she said quietly. One engineer, Todd Gibson, I rejected twice before your council flagged his potential. He's brilliant. She looked down. I've been reviewing candidates I rejected who were later hired through your program. I consistently dismissed people who didn't fit a profile, regardless of capability, including you. When you dismissed my experience that day, you weren't just rejecting me, I replied. You were reinforcing a system that overlooks excellence. My goal was ensuring that system couldn't keep hurting people with valuable contributions. Jennifer nodded. I've requested transfer to our European division. I wanted you to know I understand what you accomplished here. Excellence comes in many forms, I said, including recognizing when our judgment needs recalibration. 2 years after founding Precision, what began as my quest for validation had transformed an industry. TechFlow's methodology became the new standard, with competitors scrambling to replicate results. My revenge wasn't about humiliating Jennifer. It was systematically dismantling barriers that let inexperienced gatekeepers decide who deserves opportunity. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destroying those who underestimate you. It's building something so undeniably successful that they have no choice but to beg you to share your secrets. Excellence always finds a way to surface, and when it does, the same people who dismissed your potential will line up to claim they always believed in you.